There we go. So it was last week, I think, that I was on retreat. Last week we were not together. That's right. Um, so last week I spent up in the mountains doing a Zoom retreat with a group of people from Southern Dharma Retreat Center, and it was a really lovely experience. I wasn't sure how it would be, not sitting retreat with others in physical space, but it actually turned out to be quite useful time. And one of the things that kept coming to me throughout the week was this difference between doing mind and being mind. These mind states of doing and being. And I just kept being aware all week at various times where my particular mind was and what that experience was like when I was in one or the other of these mind states. So perhaps it will be useful to you. I hope it will, but I thought we could spend a little time talking about this. With mindfulness, we can bring awareness to all kinds of experience, right? The definition of mindfulness is paying attention on purpose to whatever's in the present moment without judgment, to the present moment itself. So what is the present moment? Well, often it's the body, what's arising internally, body sensations. It's the arising of that feeling tone that before our mind slows down so much, we often are completely unaware of. That each time the mind makes contact with something, whether it's a sound or a sight or an internal sensation, that there is an arising of pleasant, unpleasant, or neutral. So with mindfulness, we become much more aware of the nuances of experience like that. We become aware of what's at each of our sense gates, if you will, what the ear is hearing, what the eye is seeing, what the mouth and the tongue is tasting, what the body is feeling. And often when we're so busy, experience just comes in as a whole blob, right? But with mindfulness, we start seeing the nuances of these experiences. But I actually, at the risk of creating a hierarchy, which I don't mean to do, for me, one of the most important aspects of experience that I can bring mindfulness to is the mind. When we can bring awareness to the thinking mind, to the emotional mind, we start to know all kinds of things about how we perceive the world. And truthfully, the only way we come in contact with the world is through the mind. There is no direct contact with the world. It comes through this body-mind complex, right? So it makes sense that when we begin to bring mindfulness to the mind, it opens up all kinds of understanding. We begin to see, for example, which mind states lead to peace and which lead to suffering. And it's not just that we have this kind of intellectual understanding of, yeah, I'm sure this doesn't make me feel good. No. We know what it feels like when the mind is longing for something that isn't here, that isn't satisfied with this moment, but wants it to be different. With mindfulness, we start to know how that impacts us. You know, when the mind is judging, is determining someone is inferior to us or superior to us, or, we know what that feels like. And with mindfulness, we also begin to really know that inner experience of what compassion feels like when our heart really does open up to ourself or to someone else. We know the freedom felt in this when the mind is of a generous nature, not a greedy nature. You know, with mindfulness of the mind, we also start to clearly see the difference between the stories that we create about reality, right? And reality itself, you know. So this is or best I can tell, this is a lifelong journey of concentrating the mind, settling the mind so that we can know the mind and so that we can shape the mind. And what I mean by shaping is not necessarily controlling, like, a lot of what we give up on this path of mindfulness is this need to control all of life, which was an illusion in the first place. We were never in control of anyone else or any experience outside. But what we can begin to do is shape our own experience. So, for example, this judgmental mind that can arise. Well, the reason it arises is because it's arisen a million times before, and I haven't caught it. I've sort of um, milked it, if you will, indulged it. Well, then it's guaranteed to arise again. And so now when I see judgmental mind arise, I can respond to it differently. That's not something I'm interested in, sitting in judgment of another person or an experience. Or does it happen? Sure, it happens. But with mindfulness, I'm aware of what it leads to. And so I can make different choices in that moment. I can bring compassion to myself. I can bring compassion to another. I can widen the lens of what I'm seeing. Lots of different choices. So when I think about mind states that lead to peace and lead to suffering, I want to spend a little time talking about two that I don't usually think about in this way, and that is the mind state of doing and the mind state of being. Now, before I go any further, I want to say that at first, you may hear this through the lens of right and wrong or good and bad. But that's just the way the mind perceives most things. These states are actually neither good nor bad. But when we know what mind state is needed for what experience we're having, we can bring that mind state to the forefront. When mind and experience are mismatched, we inevitably tend to run into more difficulties. So I'll unpack that in just a minute. Now, even though I do think most of us are very conditioned to see most things through the lens of right and wrong, and I'm inviting us to be aware of that mind state and suspend it if possible. But with that said, we also, I think, would all agree that we live in a culture that definitely privileges doing, that awards knowing. And many, many, many people wear the badge of busyness like a trophy. And because this is the water that we swim in culturally, to be busy is good, to be busy is purposeful, to be doing is noble. Most of us at some point hit exhaustion. Not the kind of exhaustion that a few days at the beach will cure, but a fatigue that finally comes from seeing that so much doing, so much pushing, accomplishing, striving doesn't actually ever seem to get us to a peaceful mind. Might get us to a gratified mind momentarily, might do a lot of things, but it doesn't seem to get us to peaceful mind. And we begin to feel the imbalance of excessive doing. You know, it's often my experience in the first night of mindfulness-based stress reduction that this is the place that this gets named. We do this going around circle, if you haven't been in a class of mine, and this is often what finally gets spoken to, this fatigue. For some, it comes in the form of chronic anxiety coupled with exhaustion, that feeling of not being able to do enough to finally feel satisfied with one's life. For others, it's a depression or a hopelessness, this sensation of being sort of stuck on a hamster wheel, unable to stop spinning. But what's really powerful about this first night of MBSR is that I got to see humans connecting with other humans and the recognition of this experience in each other that often feels so isolating. That isolation is penetrated, and it's understood that this is a dilemma we're all in. This is this balancing of doing and being, and this imbalance that has defined so many of our lives, is a human trait. And part of mindfulness is, in fact, learning to be, learning to lean into this moment that's right here with its joys, with its pains, and with all the neutral aspects of it that we tend to just ignore. You know, mindfulness is about being able to see whatever's here as perfectly formed, not needing more or wanting different. With mindfulness, we start to learn really what the embodied experience of being is like and what benefits it brings to life. Like at first, and this is why at first we often start out talking about being with joy, because you tell people that there is a benefit to being with pain also, not in a masochistic sense, in a sense of being real with life. And people don't understand that often until they begin practicing. And then inevitably you stumble into pain, right? Because pain's a part of life. And then we can bring mindfulness to that. So this doing mind and this being mind. As the week went on last week, and I basically spent my week in sitting meditation, in mindful eating, and in listening to a teacher give some good talks. And then the other thing I did was I walked around the pond. I have a pond where I have a little place in LJ, and there's nowhere to go. You just go around the pond again and again and again. And as I walked around the pond, I just started feeling into the difference of doing mind and thinking mind, and some traits that seemed to go with each of these arose while I was walking. So I wanted to share those with you all, and you can consider them and see if they resonate with you. See if they match your experience of what when you're in doing mind or being. So the first one, in doing mind, time is important. Time is important. But in being mind, time's not so important. In doing mind, there is a past, a present, and a future. In being mind, time is now. Just see if you even can feel the difference in your body in that. In doing mind, there's a past, present, and future. And often the future gets privileged because you're trying to get somewhere. Doing mind, time is now. In doing mind, we are trying to get somewhere. In being mind, we're already here. Doing mind has an agenda. In being mind, there is no agenda. In doing mind, the mind is pointed and has intention. In being mind, it intends nothing except to be. In doing mind, it only sees what is in the frame of reference. In being mind, everything is possible. In doing mind, it's a little blinded out of necessity to get the task done. In being mind, it sees everything. Doing mind relies on strategies and armor. Being mind is open to what is arising, both pain and joy. And doing mind often lives predominantly in the rational mind, the task-oriented center. Being mind is wakeful and reliant on embodied wisdom. And finally, I don't have a counterpart to this, but it feels like being mind is driven by the energy of the heart. So those were what I noticed in these different mind states. And again, I want to come back to that lens of right and wrong, good and bad, which isn't helpful here because, of course, there are times when doing mind is precisely what we need to be in. We need to be focused. We need to be looking toward the outcome. We need to be pointed. We need to be intentional about where we're going. We need to be a little blinded to keep other things out. And we need strategies. And we need armor. We have to protect from things getting in that will distract us from the task. But what about those times when we need to be, when we need to take refuge, when it would be useful to open up and not have an agenda, to see what's possible, to see what's here. And to be as available to the heart as we are to the mind. So my invitation around this for you is as you go about your life in the next few days, if this is of interest and feels useful, to touch in at various places and see what mind state you're in and what is actually needed in the moment. You know, it was striking to me at times when I was walking around the pond, my body would be contracted. I would be more aware of the time, not because I needed to get somewhere, but it was out of this doing mind state. It was important to me of how many times I went around the pond. You know, it was important how quick I went around the pond. And when I noticed this was one particular afternoon. When I noticed this, I just stopped and we have a few benches around and I just sat down on a bench and I recentered myself, checked out the reality of the experience. And it certainly wasn't that I needed to be anywhere in a short amount of time. So I recentered and re-embodied and touched into that energy of being and began to walk again. And wow, what a different experience. The things I saw, the smells I smelled, the feelings in my body that arose, none of those were there. So, mismatch. What's needed? What's the experience? What's the mind state? Matched or mismatched? So these are just two more of the millions and millions of mind states that we can get to know with mindfulness. So I just want to invite you into these and see and get curious and see if this is of use, if it helps you experience life any more richly, any deeper. So I think I'll end there and let's just sit together for just a couple of minutes and let this settle and then we'll open it up for some discussion.